Charles Grey 1830-1834. Charles Grey, 2nd Earl Grey, was a prominent British statesman born on March 13, 1764, into an aristocratic family. He is perhaps best known for his role as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1830 to 1834. Grey entered politics at a relatively young age, representing Northumberland in the House of Commons. His political career was marked by a commitment to liberal ideals, and he played a crucial role in steering the nation through a period of significant political and social change. Notably, Charles Grey is often associated with the Reform Act of 1832, a landmark piece of legislation that aimed to rectify the outdated electoral system in Britain. As Prime Minister, Grey faced numerous challenges and controversies during his tenure, making his leadership a subject of both praise and criticism. Beyond his legislative achievements, Grey's impact on British politics resonated far beyond his time in office. Charles Grey was born into an aristocratic family on March 13, 1764, at Falladon, Northumberland, England. His family, the Greys, belonged to the landed gentry and held the title of Earls Grey. His father, General Charles Grey, was a respected military officer, and his mother, Elizabeth Grey, came from the powerful Lambton family. This aristocratic lineage provided Charles with a privileged upbringing, exposing him to the social and political circles of the British elite. Growing up in this environment, Charles Grey received a traditional education befitting his social status. His family's status and connections played a crucial role in shaping his worldview and provided him with early exposure to the workings of British society. Charles Grey's education was typical of the gentry of his time. He attended Eton College, one of the prestigious public schools in England, where he received a classical education that emphasized languages, literature, and history. Following his time at Eton, Grey continued his education at King's College, Cambridge, where he further developed his intellectual and academic pursuits. During his formative years, Grey was exposed to the intellectual currents of the Enlightenment, which emphasized reason, liberty, and progress. This intellectual environment, coupled with the social and political discussions of the time, likely influenced Grey's early political inclinations toward liberal and reformist ideas. Charles Grey's entry into politics was facilitated by his family's influence and connections. In 1786, at the age of 22, Grey inherited the family title and became the 2nd Earl Grey upon his father's death. The title came with a seat in the House of Lords, the upper chamber of the British Parliament, providing Grey with direct access to the political arena. Grey's early political career was characterized by a commitment to Whig principles, aligning himself with the liberal faction in British politics. He developed a reputation as an articulate and principled advocate for reform, advocating for issues such as parliamentary reform and the abolition of slavery. Grey's oratorical skills and passion for social justice quickly earned him recognition and respect within political circles. By the late 1780s and early 1790s, Grey's prominence within the Whig Party grew, and he became a key figure in the movement for political reform. His charisma, dedication to liberal ideals, and ability to articulate complex issues contributed to his rise as a leader within the Whig ranks. In the subsequent years, Grey's political influence continued to expand, leading to his eventual appointment as Prime Minister in 1830. The early years of Grey's political career laid the foundation for the transformative period he would later spearhead as the leader of the British government. In the early 19th century, the British electoral system was characterized by archaic practices that failed to reflect the changing socio-economic landscape of the nation. The system was largely based on historical precedents, with constituencies and representation often bearing little relation to the actual distribution of population and economic power. Many parliamentary seats were controlled by wealthy landowners, and some boroughs had very few voters, while rapidly growing industrial cities had little or no representation. The outdated and unequal electoral system resulted in widespread disenfranchisement, with a large portion of the population, especially in urban areas, having no voice in the political process. This systemic flaw fueled discontent and led to a growing demand for political reform to ensure a more representative and responsive government. As Prime Minister from 1830 to 1834, Charles Grey was a central figure in the movement for political reform. Grey recognized the need for change and, aligned with his Whig principles, became a fervent advocate for a more equitable electoral system. He believed that political power should be more inclusive, reflecting the broader interests of the nation rather than being concentrated in the hands of a select few. Grey's commitment to reform was not merely ideological. It was also a pragmatic response to the increasing social unrest and pressure for change. He understood that ignoring the demands for reform could lead to widespread discontent and, potentially, social upheaval. Grey's leadership during this critical period demonstrated his ability to navigate the complexities of British politics and champion a cause that sought to address the systemic flaws within the existing electoral framework. The Reform Act of 1832, often referred to as the Great Reform Act, represented a watershed moment in British political history. Enacted during Grey's premiership, the legislation aimed to rectify the defects of the electoral system and usher in a more representative form of governance. The key provisions of the Reform Act included redistribution of seats. The Act addressed the issue of unequal representation by redistributing parliamentary seats. Rotten boroughs, which were characterized by a small number of voters and often controlled by wealthy landowners, were disenfranchised, and their seats were reallocated to growing industrial cities and populous regions. Extension of the franchise. While the Act did not establish universal suffrage, it did extend voting rights to a larger segment of the male population. The property qualifications for voting were adjusted, allowing a broader section of the middle class to participate in the electoral process. Abolition of certain anomalies. The Act also aimed to eliminate some of the anomalies in the electoral system, such as pocket boroughs and practices that allowed undue influence by powerful individuals. The impact of the Reform Act was profound, as it marked a decisive shift toward a more democratic and representative political system. While it did not fully address all the inequalities in the system, it laid the groundwork for future reforms and set the stage for the development of a more inclusive political landscape. The Reform Act of 1832 faced significant opposition from various quarters, reflecting the deep-rooted resistance to change within certain segments of society. Traditionalists and those who benefited from the existing system, particularly landowners with influence over rotten boroughs, vehemently opposed the reform efforts. The House of Lords, dominated by conservative interests, initially rejected the bill, leading to a constitutional crisis. Controversies surrounding the reform process were not limited to political circles, they also extended to the broader public. Riots and protests erupted in response to both the push for reform and the resistance against it. The Reform Act became a focal point for social and political tensions, underscoring the magnitude of the changes being proposed. In the face of opposition, Grey displayed political skill and resilience. Ultimately, the Reform Act passed in 1832, but not without compromises and revisions. The process highlighted the challenges of achieving reform in a system resistant to change and showcased Grey's ability to navigate through political turmoil to achieve a historic transformation. Charles Grey's approach to foreign affairs during his tenure as Prime Minister, 1830 to 1834, was marked by a combination of pragmatism, diplomatic skill, and a commitment to protecting Britain's interests on the global stage. His foreign policy decisions were influenced by the complex geopolitical landscape of the time, which included the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, ongoing diplomatic challenges, and the evolving power dynamics in Europe. One of Grey's primary objectives was to maintain a balance of power in Europe, preventing the emergence of any single dominant force that could threaten the stability of the continent. Recognizing the importance of diplomacy, Grey engaged in negotiations and alliances with major European powers to safeguard Britain's strategic interests. Belgium and the Treaty of London, 1831. A key international issue during Grey's tenure was the Belgian Revolution and the question of Belgian independence. Grey's government played a crucial role in mediating the diplomatic tensions surrounding this issue. The Treaty of London in 1831 recognized Belgian independence and established its neutrality. Grey's diplomatic efforts in this matter contributed to the preservation of European stability and prevented a potentially contentious conflict. Relations with France. Grey maintained a diplomatic and cooperative relationship with France, a significant departure from the historical animosities between the two nations. His efforts to foster better relations with France contributed to a more stable and peaceful environment in Europe. Abolition of slavery. While primarily a domestic issue, Grey's commitment to social justice extended to international affairs. Grey's government played a role in the negotiations leading to the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833, which contributed to the broader international movement against the transatlantic slave trade. Diplomatic challenges. Grey faced challenges in dealing with ongoing diplomatic issues, such as the Eastern Question, which pertained to the territorial disputes in the Ottoman Empire. His government navigated these complex matters, aiming to maintain a balance that served British interests without becoming entangled in protracted conflicts. Grey's foreign policy had a significant impact on Britain's standing in the global arena during the early 1830s. By prioritizing diplomatic solutions and avoiding unnecessary conflicts, Grey contributed to a period of relative stability in Europe. The recognition of Belgian independence and the establishment of Belgium as a neutral state helped prevent potential hostilities in the region. The cooperative relationship with France under Grey's leadership not only improved bilateral relations but also contributed to the broader stability of the European balance of power. Britain's commitment to abolitionist principles, both domestically and internationally, further solidified its image as a nation at the forefront of progressive and humanitarian causes. Grey's tenure showcased the importance of diplomacy in maintaining Britain's influence and standing in global affairs. By navigating the complexities of international relations with tact and pragmatism, Grey left a legacy that contributed to a period of relative peace and stability in Europe, enhancing Britain's reputation as a diplomatic and moral force on the world stage. The period of Charles Grey's premiership, 1830 to 1834, was marked by significant economic challenges stemming from the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars and the ongoing Industrial Revolution. The transition from agrarian to industrial economies posed numerous difficulties, including labor unrest, economic inequality, and the need for structural reforms. Post-war economic adjustment. The end of the Napoleonic Wars brought about economic challenges as Britain transitioned from a wartime to a peacetime economy. Demobilization of troops, the return of soldiers to civilian life, and the reintegration of wartime industries into peacetime production presented economic challenges that required careful management. Industrial Revolution impact. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing during Grey's premiership, leading to significant social and economic transformations. The rapid expansion of industries, urbanization, and technological advancements brought both opportunities and challenges. Issues such as poor working conditions, child labor, and the lack of labor rights became increasingly prevalent. The social changes during Grey's time were closely tied to the economic shifts and technological advancements of the Industrial Revolution. Urbanization led to the growth of cities, creating new social dynamics and challenges. Urbanization and migration. The rise of industrial centers attracted a large rural population to urban areas in search of employment. This migration contributed to the growth of cities but also resulted in crowded living conditions, inadequate sanitation, and the emergence of urban poverty. Emergence of the working class. The Industrial Revolution gave rise to a new working class that became a significant social and political force. The working class faced exploitation, low wages, and poor working conditions, leading to increased demands for workers' rights and social reforms. Social inequalities. The economic disparities between the industrial elite and the working class became pronounced during this period. The concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few industrialists raised questions about social justice and equity. Grey's government recognized the need to address the social and economic challenges arising from industrialization. Several policies and reforms were implemented to mitigate the negative impact of these changes. Factory Act of 1833. Grey's government passed the Factory Act, a landmark piece of legislation aimed at improving working conditions in factories. The act set limits on the working hours of women and children and established standards for workplace safety. Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834. Though passed after Grey's time in office, this legislation reflected the ongoing efforts to address social issues. The Poor Law Amendment Act aimed to reform the existing system of poor relief, emphasizing workhouses and reducing outdoor relief to encourage self-sufficiency. Abolition of slavery. While primarily a humanitarian and moral issue, Grey's government's commitment to the abolition of slavery also had social and economic implications. The Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 marked a significant step toward ending the transatlantic slave trade and addressing the moral and social consequences of slavery. Reform Act of 1832. Although primarily focused on political reform, the Reform Act also had social implications. By addressing some of the inequalities in parliamentary representation, it contributed to a broader sense of political inclusion and representation. In conclusion, Charles Grey's 1830 to 1834 period in British history stands as a pivotal era that witnessed significant political, social, and economic changes. His enduring legacy is not only tied to specific legislative achievements but also to the broader impact of his leadership on the evolution of democratic ideals and political governance in the United Kingdom. The reforms initiated during Grey's time continue to shape the foundations of the modern British political system, making his legacy a crucial chapter in the nation's historical narrative. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it informative, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more content like this in the future.